This is TAU Unbound, the English language podcast of Tel Aviv University. Please welcome your host, Ido Aharoni, Tel Aviv University's graduate, member of the Board of Governors, lecturer, writer, and veteran diplomat.
Welcome to TAU Unbound. This is Ido Aharoni, your host, and today it is my great pleasure and privilege to host the legendary Professor Dina Porat. I say legendary because I've been waiting for you for a long time. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having invited me. Please don't exaggerate.
No, I've been a fan for many, many years. I read your articles. I've been following your work. And you are not only a great historian, but also a moral voice. And I think that many people that deal with the issue of the Holocaust, which is your area of expertise, and particularly because of your role with Yad Vashem, I'll explain in a second what is your official title. I think it puts you in a position when you say something, people listen. And
I hope so.
I think that's very important. I'm so glad that you're here. I know you've been here before in the Hebrew version of the podcast, but it's your first English interview and hopefully not the last.
It is.
For the benefit of our viewers and listeners, let me just be accurate about the current title of Professor Dina Porat. She's Professor Emeritus of Modern Jewish History at the Department of Jewish History at Tel Aviv University and the Chief Historian of Yad Vashem. Those of you who don't know, Yad Vashem is the official authority founded by the State of Israel to commemorate, research, document the Holocaust. It is also the institution that issues the Righteous Among the Nations medals or certificates. So I think to date, almost 17,500 people were recognized as...
More than that, some 23,000.
23,000 people were recognized as righteous among the nations.
Yeah, I think you have the number from before the Eastern Bloc was opened. And since then, we have more.
We have more. So the Eastern Bloc, since the collapse of the Soviet Union...
Yes, exactly.
We have more access to information.
Yes.
It's important to mention that there are other institutions in Israel that deal with Holocaust commemoration, like the Ghetto Fighters Museum at Lochmei HaGhettot, Yad Mordechai, there's a museum in Bnei Brak, but they're all working together with Yad Vashem.
Yes, they are.
Yes. And so, first of all, welcome.
Thank you again.
Thank you for being here. And the first question that I always ask our guests is, how did you end up becoming a historian? And particularly, why the specialty in Holocaust and modern Jewish history?
It's a Holocaust and Antisemitism and modern Jewish history, yes, exactly. I think that the main influence on this choice came from my parents' home. My parents were, both of them, very active in Jewish life. Sorry. In the Jewish community in Buenos Aires, in Argentina in general. Their origin was Eastern Europe, but this is where they were active. My father was a leader, a central leader in the community, then a central political figure here from Mapai. And the house was filled with books about Jewish history, Jewish culture, Jewish tradition. Atheists, secular atheists, but filled with imbued with Jewish history, etc. And then another factor is that I came here to Tel Aviv University to do my BA in the Department of Jewish History that became my second home ever since the middle of the 1960s. And to my amazement, no one was teaching the Holocaust. No one. It was not taught, it was not learned.
So this is after Eichmann trial. Still,
yes,
no one was...
it is a few years after the Eichmann trial, and still the attitude was that it is dangerous for the mind, for the emotion to deal with the Holocaust. And this is where I started to fill this gap in.
So you started doing something that was not, was not common at the time.
No, it was not at all common. The head of the head of the department, Professor Shlomo Simonson, may he rest in peace, he was director of the university for at least 8 years, said that I look like a very nice girl, but I will go mad if I deal with the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. And I said no. And Professor Daniel Karpe and Uriel Tal were the first ones to come from the Hebrew University and teach us. This is where we started. I saw everyone was then dealing with Zionism.
Right. And the notion was that if we talk too much about the Holocaust, not only that it would endanger the solidarity and the unity of statism, right? Which the
Yes.
IDF was at the center of this notion.
Exactly. Ben-Gurion didn't want to hear about dealing with the Holocaust. So this is why why and where, these are the two reasons for which I started.
Amazing. This is a little known chapter. So you're a pioneer in many ways.
Well, we started then teaching, learning about the Holocaust, and then the development inside Israeli society was towards more relations with the diaspora, more understanding of what happened during the Holocaust, and many more started dealing with it, teaching, writing, etc. So then I moved to the field of anti-Semitism, which was again almost untouched before.
That's a beautiful segue to my first question to you, which relates to, of course, what happened to us after 10/7. So you wrote a very important piece it was published in Haaretz, in which you make a distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. If you could clarify to our listeners and viewers, what is the difference between the two?
Well, I would say that for quite a while, for a few decades after Israel was established, there was a distinction between anti-Semitism, which was more an attitude against the Jews outside Israel, Jews in Jewish communities worldwide, and anti-Zionism was a sort of a criticism and an attitude toward the young Jewish state. And the notion was also that, in fact, we have, after the establishment of Israel, like two types of people, Israelis and Jews, and that they are different. But what happened with time was, and especially it so happened after the notorious Durban Conference in South Africa in 2001, it was meant to be a UN conference against racism, and in a matter of a few days, it turned into a tirade against the Jewish people, against Israel. 2 days after it ended, the Twin Towers fell. It was Israel with the West, with the United States. Since then, there is a blurring of the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Israel is considered a Jewish state, part and parcel of the Jewish people, to which we fully agree, of course, and warmly accept. That activity was taken from or shifted from Christian hands to more Muslim hands. Anti-Semitism became more violent. The whole scene became more violent, coming more from the street, from extreme right, extreme left, radical Islam. And there we have, in later years now, we have anti-Zionism expressed in anti-Semitic terms. It is still against the state of Israel, but it is replete with symbols, notions, events, crucifixions, blood libels, Nazi, etc., comparisons, And the Israel is considered a Jewish state, and its inhabitants, we, the citizens of Israel, we carry the Jewish characteristics because we're Jews. And
Right.
so the
And so
distinction blurred.
in some of your writings, you also write about the direct link to anti-Zionist propaganda that emanated from the Soviet Union.
Yes.
So you're seeing in some of today's, and you wrote about the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and you mentioned Durban, which leads me to also talk about South Africa of today. So you go back to the early days of the anti-Zionist Soviet propaganda.
Yeah. I would say the following, that today, when you when you witness this surge in anti-Semitism worldwide, in some hundreds of percents in almost every country, more violence, more insulting expressions and behaviors, and a lot more in the social nets that are where everyone now, especially the youngsters, are getting their information from. When you look at the ground reasons, you see, first of all, ignorance. I will come back to, I'm putting the Soviet Union here in line. First, you see as underground reasons, ignorance. You see generations that study nothing and know nothing about World War I, World War II, about the Holocaust, the Middle East. They are parading in the streets from the river to the sea. They don't know which river to which sea and who is living between them. I think the peak of it is these plaques that homosexuals are in support of Palestine. Don't you know that in Muslim countries, homosexualism is not only forbidden, is persecuted physically, a danger? No, they don't just don't know. When asked, where is Gaza on the map, they don't know. Show us Israel on the map. They are astonished to see that Israel is so small. It must be a lot larger with tens of millions of people. Okay. The second main reason, indeed, or reason is what you pointed out. And this is that traditionally there was a political power, the Soviet Union, that was using this growing ignorance in order to instill what they saw politically as necessary for them. And there was one moment in which the Soviet Union voted, in November 1947, voted for the establishment of an Arab and a Jewish state. But why is that? Because they wanted to enter the Middle East when the British are out and before the Americans are in. So it wasn't really in real favor, or in a really positive attitude. In the Soviet Union, Jews were persecuted, were put to trial for accusations that never happened, for crimes that they never committed. The elite was either expelled to Siberia or executed. And the Soviet Union took it as a tool. It took anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism as a tool in gathering a host of countries, Latin American countries, African countries, Far East, and making them a bloc that the Soviet Union led, and when it needed, it used in favor of Arab countries and against Israel. The 1975 decision, UN decision that Zionism equals racism is a work of the Soviet Union that enlisted the vote. Today, the second background reason is Iran that inherited the planes of the Soviet Union.
Not Russia, Iran?
No, not Russia. Russia, Iran, and China are today in an alliance. We know that. They are a bloc against the Western bloc, United States, Canada, the UK, etc., France. We are automatically in the Western side and, of course, with the United States, and thereby Israel is attacked by this bloc led by Iran with Russia and China. Iran today follows what the Soviet Union did by paying. Qatar too will come to Qatar, paying countries, supporting their economy, etc., for the and the profit is the political support and being part of this bloc that Iran made. Iran, in 2005, decided to use Holocaust denial as a political tool. And since then, Holocaust deniers who are on trial in Europe fled to Tehran, and they are there still, and they help there in putting up Holocaust-denying exhibitions.
Conferences, yeah.
Conferences, contests of caricatures, Holocaust-denying caricatures, etc., etc. It's a political tool, the way the Soviet Union used it as a political tool. Because what Iran is saying is that there is a saying that the State of Israel was established due to the Holocaust. And if the Holocaust never existed, then Israel has no right to be established, to exist. Israel was founded on Zionism, because of Zionism. And the work that was done here since 1860, since Mikveh Israel and on, had the country been empty, there was no place for survivors.
Right. By the way, excuse me for that I'm stopping your line of thinking, but what you're saying brings to memory
Yes.
the first Middle East action taken by President Barack Obama. He came to the Middle East, to Cairo.
Yes, and did not come to Israel.
And addressed the parliament. And then instead of coming to Israel and address the Knesset, he went to Buchenwald with Elie Wiesel, with the late Elie Wiesel and Angela Merkel. And in many ways, I think, indirectly, he was supporting this Iranian narrative.
Yeah, indirectly.
Indirectly, ignoring Israel.
Yes.
And going to the Holocaust. And that was his way of balancing.
Yeah, and his way of connecting himself to the Jews in the United States, for whose identity the Holocaust is quite a factor. If you didn't cut my line of thought, if we are going on with the reasons of today anti-Semitism, we pointed out ignorance, we pointed out Iran instead of the Soviet Union, and let us now speak about money, and money that goes to the academia. I don't know, not many people are aware of the fact that in Qatar, in Doha, there is a place, quite a spacious place, called Education City in Doha. And there, Qatar is financing branches of American University, Cornell Medicine, Georgetown, one of the best of the Ivy Leagues. A good university in Dallas, Texas, got $1 billion, not $1 million, $1 billion, what we call in Hebrew, milliard, $1 billion from Qatar, and for what? With this $1 billion, they bought the ownership of 50 research projects in Dallas, Texas, and financing a branch in Doha. Now, this university is the first one to pull itself together after what happened with the 3 presidents of Harvard, Penn, and Yale, not Yale.
MIT. Yeah.
MIT, sorry, in the Congress. Dallas was the first to pull itself together and cut off its branch in Doha. But it still remained with the money they got before. What does it mean to buy 50 projects? It means today Arab money, it was, again, Qatar inherited Libya. Libya during the days of Muammar Gaddafi was paying. Now Qatar is paying especially American, Canadian universities, and then it gets hold of the contents. It buys chairs. It buys tenures. What you can study today in a faculty that teaches the Middle East is not the Middle East, is not really the Middle East. And the great danger is that in these universities, the next generation of leadership is growing up. And this is what they are exposed to. And in many times, this is what they are studying. On top of that, there is this atmosphere in faculties that are dedicated to gender. They started with gender, with taking care of women's rights. But now they're taking care, and this is very good in itself, very idealistic, of anyone who is an underdog, a minority, black, Afro-American, Indian, women in Muslim countries, homosexuals, etc. The Jews are a minority. They also need protection and taking care of their rights, but they are not there. They are not in the list of protected minorities and detect groups, because in these academic circles, Jews are called privileged. They are privileged because they are white, because they are born, so they say, to better education, better financial means in their families, better access to administration positions. They belong to the administration that is hated by those persecuted. And so the Jews cannot belong there, and Israel cannot be a country that is considered as attacked, because the Palestinians are part of these minorities, of these underdogs, and an underdog is automatically right and just, and the one who needs protection, even if he does what they did on 7th of October.
By the way, how do you explain,
Yes.
For Holocaust deniers, it took a long time for them to surface. But post 10/7, only a couple of weeks.
Oh,
And
less
people
than that.
Yeah, people started denying what happened a few days after it happened.
Yes. Well, Holocaust denial, I think you're right that its heydays came later. It started right away. 1945, you already have the first book in France denying the Holocaust. France is the intellectual capital of Holocaust denial. But you are right. The arguments became more conspicuous and the work of the deniers more intensive in the 1970s, 80s, until the middle of the 90s, more or less. And here you see times change. Information goes quicker. Denying comes quicker. Everything is much quicker. In a matter of hours and days. I think if I may share with you this horrible thought, that more terrible is the crime, the more intensive and quicker is the denial. Because if a terrible crime has been committed in the Holocaust and now in 7/11, 7th of October, if such a crime is committed, then those who perpetrated want it off their heads because they will be punished. If it is all documented and known, they will be brought to trial. If there is denial, they have a chance not to be taken to trial. And so right away, denying, orchestrated by Iran's money and propaganda, and by the money that Arab countries, including Qatar, put in universities. Immediately, you had hundreds of academics signing petitions and letters saying that Israel is committing a genocide. We hardly got into the Gaza Strip, and there was this accusation was already up. The first petition was signed before the IDF entered the Gaza.
Right, on the 8th already.
Right
there
away.
was a Cornell University professor that on the morning of the 7th stood at the lawn of Cornell with a megaphone
Yes.
and told, and he's a professor of African studies. His name is Russell Rickford. I don't know whatever happened to him. I hope he will never find job again. He said he was exhilarated and energized by the actions of Hamas.
He hardly knew what they are doing.
Yeah. Now, the question is, these are intelligent people. Don't they know that they're being used?
I'm not sure they think they are used. I think that these notions of protecting the underdogs, of which the Palestinians are one, the notion of postmodernism. Today there is already reaction, but for many years, postmodernism, which relativizes values, relativizes morality, and says, okay, everyone is entitled to their narrative. Everyone has a narrative. We should consider all narratives. And this does not enable you to say, this is right and this is wrong. Here is a crime that should be punished. Here is a side that suffered a terrible attack. So academic life became, I would say, more diluted, not saying what is, not looking the evil in the eye.
And saying it's a legitimate form of resistance. Even raping women is a legitimate form of resistance in the eyes of feminists.
Women organizations, until today, hardly opened their mouth to say something about the terrible rape tirade that happened. So I'm not sure they know or think that they are being used. They are sticking to their notions and to their ideals and do not let events change it, because then if they admit what happened, they would have to admit that they were siding and backing and supporting a side, Palestinians, that was proved to be criminal upside down. They will have to say, okay, we regret, we were wrong.
They'll have to part ways with the underdog.
Yes. And no one wants to admit that he was wrong.
That the underdog is wrong.
So they go on.
By the way, it's one of the first things that I tell my students when I teach international relations is that what I learned in my many years in diplomacy is that sometimes the underdog is wrong. Mm-hmm. And in the case of the Palestinians, I think that many people can identify with the political plight of the Palestinians, including many Israelis do. But you cannot support Hamas.
And you cannot support terrorism.
And you cannot support terrorism.
And killing constant killing of civilians.
Yes. So we're running out of time, and I just wanted to ask you, from your perspective, from your historical perspective, so you identify this recurring cycle, only this time different actors, right? Libya in the past, now it's Qatar, Soviet Union, now it's Iran, and so on and so forth. What is your prediction for the future? Where does that all end, if it ends at all?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. Right now, there is a fertile ground for anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Anti-Zionism imbued with anti-Semitic terms, as we said, because it's ignorance, it's money, it's the political balance, it's demographic changes. You know that Brussels, according to the demographs, is about to be the first city, the first capital in Europe that would have Muslim majority. And the United States is losing its white majority in a few years again. Demographic changes, the social nets, the artificial intelligence that can turn anything into truth while it is a blatant lie and an invention. All these cultural, social, political factors in the background, I think will not go away that soon because they are connected to the crisis of the democracies, the feeling of citizens in many countries that there isn't a real leadership leading them away from the crisis. And as long as Israel and the Jews can be used as a political tool and a cultural and social reference, this will go on. But if you ask where, on why, on what terms can it end, I think that perhaps when in these democracies in crisis and in lack of leadership, there would be a feeling that it is not Israel. Israel was the first to be attacked. But the wish of Islam to dominate, and to dominate because the religion, the text, the tradition pushes them towards not to compromise, but to dominating. And it excuses terror. If this enters Western countries, the way it did on 9/11, the way it did in some cases in France, in Belgium, if this starts, and today there are fears after the 7th of October that such events may rise and may happen, then perhaps there would be a shift in change.
One last question. In one of your articles, you made a distinction between comparing to the Holocaust and making an association that is related to the Holocaust. So I'd like to ask you a question about you who studied what happened to Germany that fell into Nazism. How can open Western pluralistic democracies protect themselves from the very freedoms and liberties that they themselves grant? Because it seems to me that's the main problem today. That's the vulnerability of democracies.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And it is connected to your former question about when would it end, or where will democracies and academia in democratic countries pull itself together. I think that studying the years before World War II and before the Holocaust, studying the signs, when does a democracy weaken? When does it lose its hold? When do you understand that the mind of society is being influenced by negative propaganda, etc.? When negative leadership is coming up, if you know the signs and you know your history, I think you can take care. You can take care and be on your guard.
Well, on this optimistic note, I'd like to end our fascinating discussion. We learned a lot from you. I would like to thank you
Thank you.
for all that you do. Please continue to express your voice and opinion in the press and elsewhere. You're doing a very important work.
Thank you very much. You too.
Thank you. And to our viewers and listeners back home from Tel Aviv, goodbye until our next episode.